"Please let me work for you, ma'am. I'm strong," pleaded the little mountain boy. Then he repaired her house. Winter had settled over the mountains like a long, unbroken breath, white, deep, and ancient. Snow lay thick across the pines, hugging every branch, bowing every limb. The wind slipped down the slopes in slow, mournful sighs, carrying with it the cold that felt less like weather and more like memory, an old one, heavy and patient. On that ridge, where no trails stayed open long enough for maps to remember them, a woman lived alone. Mara Elling. Her cabin clung to the hillside the way stubborn things do, its beams aged, its roof patched with tin and hope, its porch sagging slightly under winter's weight. Smoke rose from her chimney in thin, wavering threads, the color of distant storms. She was hauling a cracked bucket of meltwater toward the door when she first saw him. A small figure, no more than 12, maybe 13, struggling up the slope with both hands sunk deep into the snow, as if dragging himself against the mountain itself. His coat was 3 sizes too large, torn at the elbow. His boots didn't match. Frost clung to his eyebrows, his cheeks, even to the ends of his hair, where breath had frozen and stayed. Mara froze, the bucket tilting in her grip. For a second, the world held still around him. Then the boy lifted his head. His lips were blue, trembling, not just from cold, but from something deeper, thinner, brittle, like a last layer of ice on a river. "Ma'am." His voice cracked, the sound more like a gasp than a word. "Please, let me work for you." He took another step, but his knees folded under him, sending him sideways into the snow. Mara dropped the bucket. It hit the ground with a dull thud, water sloshing out and freezing almost instantly. She crossed the distance in 3 strides, kneeling beside him. When she touched his shoulder, he flinched, not from fear, but from the instinct of someone who had been taught to brace before being struck. "Easy," she murmured. "Easy now." His eyes fluttered open, brown, wide, frightened, yet stubborn, holding on with the very last thread he had. "I'm strong," he whispered, desperate. "Please, let me work for you, ma'am. I can chop wood, fix things, anything. Just don't send me away." Mara felt something move inside her, quiet, unwelcome, and undeniable. A memory. Another winter. Another trembling voice. She swallowed hard. "You're freezing," she said softly. "You won't work a day for me if you die on my porch." "I won't," he gasped. "I won't die. I need somewhere to be." His breath clouded weakly in the air. There were no roads up here, no homes nearby, no reason a child should have reached her door unless desperation itself had pushed him through the drifts. She hooked an arm under his and lifted. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled again. "Don't," she said. "Just lean." And he did, his whole weight, small as it was, collapsing into her side. Inside the cabin, warmth washed over him like something he didn't trust at first. The fire snapped and whispered from the stone hearth. The room smelled of pine resin and stew left warming on the stove. Mara eased him onto the bench beside the fire, where pelts softened the wood. "Name?" she asked, already unwrapping the scarf from his neck. He hesitated, as if names were fragile things, easily stolen. "Jonas," he finally said. "Jonas Cade." She pressed a hand to his cheek, ice cold. His skin was turning pale under the frostbite. "How long have you been outside?" he swallowed. "Since last night." "Last? Jonas, The storm was brutal." He didn't look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on the flames as if afraid they would disappear. "Had to keep moving," he murmured. "If I stopped, I'd fall asleep." "And if you fell asleep?" He blinked slowly. "Then I wouldn't wake up." Mara inhaled, the air sharp in her lungs. She brought a blanket from the cot and draped it over his shoulders, tucking it around him with careful, practiced hands. He stiffened briefly, then let himself sink into the warmth. A moment passed, quiet, fragile. Then Jonas lifted his head. "I wasn't lying," he said. "I can work. I'm strong. I'll help you, if you let me stay." His voice hit that last word like he was afraid it might shatter. "Stay." Mara turned toward the window. Snow drifted lazily down, tapping softly against the glass. The mountains loomed beyond, silent, vast, indifferent. She had lived here for years without another soul speaking that word to her. "Jonas," she said, slow, steady. "You can barely stand. I'll get better. You shouldn't be out here alone." "I'm not anymore," he whispered, almost pleading. Mara's jaw tightened, not from anger, but from something colder. A truth she didn't want to look at too closely. "Where are your people?" she asked gently. Jonas didn't answer. His shoulders curled inward, his hands clenched in the blanket, his breathing hitched, too quiet for most ears. But Mara heard everything that wasn't being said. She knelt in front of him, lowering herself to his eye level. "Jonas, look at me." Slowly he did, and the moment she saw the hollowing behind his eyes, the kind carved by winter and grief, not weather alone, her decision settled in her chest with the weight of something inevitable. "You're safe here," she said. His breath broke. Mara didn't reach for him, didn't touch his hands, didn't offer comfort he wasn't ready to accept. She simply rose and added wood to the fire, letting the heat fill the room, letting the silence settle around them in a way that didn't hurt. Outside, the wind howled through the pines. Inside, Jonas watched her, watching the way she moved, the strength in her shoulders, the quiet in her voice, like he was learning what safety felt like for the first time. And slowly, very slowly, warmth returned to his face. But winter wasn't done with either of them. Not yet. By morning the storm had quieted, but the cold had deepened into something that felt almost alive. Frost webbed across the window panes in thin white branches. The cabin creaked softly in the shrinking grip of ice. Dawn light slid over the floorboards in a pale ribbon. Jonas slept curled on the bench beside the fire, wrapped in the blanket she'd given him. At some point in the night he had kicked one leg free, revealing a boot with the sole nearly torn off. Mara stood in the doorway watching him breathe, slow, uneven, like each inhale was a small argument with the world. His cheeks had warmed some, color returning, but the bruising on his fingers told her frostbite had lingered longer than safe. She made a quiet sound, half sigh, half thought, then turned toward the stove. The smell of simmering broth drifted gently through the cabin. She ladled some into a tin bowl and touched the steam rising from it with the back of her hand. Warm, not scalding. Behind her, Jonas stirred. A soft grunt, a shift of blankets, then a quick startled breath as he jolted upright. Mara turned. "You're awake." Jonas blinked at her, dazed at first, then remembering where he was. His shoulders hunched instantly, as if preparing for distance, for rules, for reprimand. "I didn't mean to sleep so long," he said, voice rasped from cold and dreams. "I can get to work. Eat first." He fell silent. Mara set the bowl on the table. He hesitated, as though crossing the room without permission was some invisible line he wasn't sure he was allowed to step over. "Go on," she said quietly. He rose slowly, clutching the blanket around his shoulders. Each movement was stiff, careful. He sat at the table, not touching the bowl yet, just staring at the steam curling upward. His hands trembled. "You warm enough?" Mara asked. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You don't have to call me ma'am." He looked up at her, eyes uncertain, wary, almost confused. "What should I call you then?" She paused. It had been a long time since anyone had needed a name from her. "Mara." He nodded again, filing the word away like something precious. "Thank you, Mara." The way he said it, soft, cautious, felt like a step across ice. He lifted the bowl with both hands and drank slowly, blowing over the surface between sips. When he finished, he set it down gently, as if afraid of making noise. Then he straightened. "I can start with the woodpile," he said. "After that I can fix the hinge on your door, and the gutter spout. It's bent from the ice. I seen it last night." Mara blinked. "You noticed all that?" Jonas shrugged one shoulder. "Just habits. I had to do all kinds of work before." Before. The word carried weight, something sharp and unfinished. Mara didn't press. She only stepped toward the window where snow had drifted halfway up the outer wall. "You won't manage the woodpile today," she said. "Not with that boot held together by stubbornness alone." Jonas looked down at his feet, embarrassed. "It's fine. I can mend it. I know how. I can do anything that needs—" "Jonas," he stopped. "You're not here to prove yourself." He opened his mouth, closed it. The confusion in his eyes shifted, became something else, something closer to fear. "I am," he whispered. "If you let me stay, I have to earn it." Mara's chest tightened. Jonas's shoulders folded inward, his fingers picking anxiously at the torn edge of the blanket. "If I don't work," he murmured, "then I'm just another burden." The fire popped behind him. Snow drifted from the eaves outside. Mara lowered herself into the chair opposite him, leaning her elbows gently on the table. "Jonas," she said, her voice barely above the hush of the winter. "You came here half frozen, alone, hungry. You don't owe me anything for that." His jaw clenched. "That's not how it works," he said softly. She waited. He didn't go on. Whatever story lay behind those words was still sealed tight. He wrapped the blanket tighter. "I'll fix the roof at least," he said quickly, almost pleading. "I swear I can. I used to do repairs. I helped a man, back where I lived, before things went bad. I know how to patch leaks. I know how to brace beams. I'm not lying. I believe you," Mara said. The tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. "But you're still healing. Start small. Bring in the firewood I split yesterday, that's all." His eyes darted toward the door. "I can do that." "Good," she said. "After that, you rest." Jonas shifted as if the idea of resting was something foreign. I can't just sit around." "You can here." The words hung in the air, simple, but heavier than the thickest snowfall. Jonas's eyes lowered to his hands. His breathing grew shallow again, the way it had when he first collapsed in the snow. Mara softened her voice. "This cabin has stood for 12 winters," she said. "It doesn't need saving. You do." He looked up at her, like her words had cracked something open inside him. "Mara," he whispered, barely audible. "I'm strong. I can be useful. Just don't send me away." Her throat tightened. She didn't reach for him. She didn't close the distance between them. But her voice, steady, low, carried enough warmth to soften the cold that had lived behind his eyes since he arrived. "You're not going anywhere," she said. The boy swallowed, deep and shaking, and nodded slowly. Outside, the wind shifted against the cabin walls, a soft groan of wood, a hush of snow sliding from the roof. The cold was settling deeper, and so was Jonas. By midday, the sky had turned the color of slate. Snow clouds gathered over the ridge in thick gray folds, heavy enough to bend the light. Jonas worked outside in the muted cold, hauling in the firewood Mara had split days earlier. He moved slowly at first, still stiff from the long freeze. But with each load his steps steadied, his breath billowed in soft plumes around him. Mara watched from the window, her hands resting on the edge of the counter, fingers curled slightly, not in worry, but in a quiet kind of attention she hadn't felt in years. He moved like someone who'd learned to work hard before learning to be a child. When the wind shifted, Jonas instinctively flinched, not from cold, but from memory. Mara saw it, felt it. The kind of reflex that didn't come from weather. She stepped away from the window. Outside, Jonas set another log by the door and straightened, rubbing his hands together against the sting of the air. Snowflakes caught in his hair, clinging to the dark strands like pieces of the sky. He noticed her when she opened the door. "You should take a break," she said. "I'm fine." "You're shivering." Jonas crossed his arms. "I've worked in worse." "I don't doubt that. But you don't have to now." He hesitated, glancing toward the pile. "It's almost done," he murmured. "Then finish it after you warm up." Jonas looked at her for a long moment, measuring her words against every rule he had carried in. Then silently, he nodded. Inside, he dropped the blanket of snow from his shoulders and sat near the fire. Mara handed him a mug of warm broth. He gripped it carefully. "Thank you." She sat across from him. "Jonas," she said quietly, "you came up this mountain alone. That's not something a child should have to do." His jaw tightened. "I'm not a child." "No," she said softly. "Not anymore." He looked down at the steam rising from his cup. His breathing shifted again, that tiny catch she had begun to recognize. Not fear of her, fear of remembering. She let the silence sit with him, unforced. Finally, he spoke. "I used to live in a camp." His fingers tightened around the mug. "Work camp, outside the mining valley. Men worked in the tunnels. I hauled coal, sometimes wood, sometimes whatever the foreman threw my way." Mara inhaled slowly. She didn't interrupt. "They said if I kept my head down, I could stay. Said if I worked hard enough, I'd get my keep, my meals." He swallowed. "Said I was lucky." Mara's eyes darkened. Jonas continued, voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "But last month, a wall in the lower shaft collapsed. Killed 2 men. Foreman said it was someone's fault. Didn't matter whose, just needed someone to pay for it." His breath wavered. "Someone like me." Mara felt the heat of the fire on her hands, but an older, colder anger stirred beneath it. "So I left," Jonas whispered. "Night after the storm started. I knew they'd come after me if I went down the main trail, so I took the steep pass, kept walking till my legs stopped." His voice shook. "I didn't think I'd make it, but I knew there was a cabin up here. I seen it once. Thought maybe—" He swallowed hard. "Maybe someone here would let me work. Let me stay. Just for a while." Mara leaned back slowly in her chair. The wind pressed against the window, the sound low and long. "You walked through a mining pass in a blizzard," she murmured. "You must have been terrified." Jonas blinked at her, almost startled. "I wasn't," he said. "I was tired. I didn't want to go back. I couldn't." "And so you came here," Jonas nodded. "I knew you lived alone. People in the valley talk about the woman on the hill. They say you keep to yourself, that you don't like trouble." Mara breathed something that might have been a faint laugh. "And you thought that meant I'd take you in?" "No," he said quickly. "I thought it meant you were fair." Fair. The word landed heavier than it should have. Mara stood then, slowly, and took his empty mug to the counter. Jonas watched her, shoulders drawn tight as if waiting for a verdict. She faced him. "You're safe here," she said again, firmer this time, "and you can stay, not because of the work you do, but because no one should face a mountain alone at your age." Jonas's breath hitched. His eyes dropped to his hands. Mara walked to the corner and lifted a small wooden box from a shelf. When she opened it, Jonas leaned forward slightly. Inside were tools, carefully kept, old but strong. Hammers, nails, a set of chisels, a small level, a folded strip of leather, and an extra wool hat. She set the hat on the table. "For the woodpile," she said, "and for when you're up on the roof later. You don't have to prove anything to me. But if you want to help—" She pushed the box toward him. "Start with this." Jonas looked at the tools, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer, something that hurt more than fear. Hope. He reached out and touched the rim of the hat, running a thumb along the woven edge. "I can fix the gutter first," he said quietly. "Then check the roof beams." "Good," she said. The wind rattled the chimney. Snow whispered against the window. Jonas lifted the hat to his head, adjusting it with both hands. It sat a little big on him, sliding just above his eyebrows. When he glanced up, Mara saw the smallest, fragile flicker of a smile forming. Not a full one, but enough. Mara turned away before he could see the way it struck her. He would work. He would heal. He would try to belong. But winter wasn't done testing them. Not by a long stretch. By late afternoon, the mountain changed. Clouds thickened, lowering themselves over the ridge like a dark hand closing into a fist. The wind rose in sharp, sudden breaths, carrying flecks of ice that stung the skin even through wool. Jonas was outside repairing the gutter spout, balancing on the porch rail with a steadiness that didn't match the tremor still hiding in his hands. Mara stepped out, coat wrapped tight. "You see the sky?" she asked. Jonas looked up. The clouds churned overhead, gray swallowing gray. "Yes," he said. "Storm's coming. A bad one." He nodded once, then returned to tightening the bracket on the spout. "You should come in," she said. "Almost done." A stubbornness lived in his voice, a quiet one, not loud, not reckless, but firm, like he had spent too long being told to stop, and now stopping felt like going backward. She didn't argue. Instead, she took the ladder leaning against the wall and carried it to the barn before the wind could knock it over. When she returned, Jonas was climbing down from the porch rail. "It's fixed," he said, breath clouding in the cold. "The angle was wrong. That's why ice kept backing up." "Good," Mara said, brushing snow from her shoulders. "That'll save the roof a full season of trouble." Jonas blinked, startled by the praise. It settled into his chest like warmth he didn't expect. Inside, they shut the door against the rising wind. Snow slapped at the windows, the sound sharp and rhythmic, like small stones thrown by invisible hands. Mara hung her coat. Jonas stood just inside the door, brushing flakes from his hair. "You did good work today," she said. He lowered his eyes, his voice quiet. "Thank you." She made stew for supper, a thick, root-heavy pot that filled the cabin with a scent that was warm enough to soften even the hardest corners of winter. Jonas sat at the table, elbows tucked close, careful not to take up space. "You can sit back," Mara said, noticing how rigid he looked. "I don't want to be in the way." "You're not." He hesitated, then leaned back slightly, no more than an inch. But it was enough to make Mara look at him with something soft in her expression. They ate mostly in silence. Jonas took small bites, almost as if rationing each taste. Mara watched the storm through the window as it deepened into something fierce. Snow whipped across the dark, swirling in hungry spirals that vanished against the cabin walls. When the last of the daylight surrendered, the storm finally unleashed itself. Wind screaming around the cabin, snow hammering the shutters like fists. The fire wavered, then steadied as Mara fed it more wood. Jonas stood near the hearth, staring at the flames. The wind shrieked through the chimney flue. Jonas flinched, shoulders jerking, breath catching. "Jonas," Mara said softly. He didn't turn. "The wind can't get in," she reassured. "The cabin's old, but it's strong. It sounds like—" His voice trailed off. "Like what?" He swallowed. His hands closed over each other in front of him, fingers whitening. "Like the mine tunnels, when the walls were shifting." He exhaled sharply, the breath shaking. "When you could hear the earth crack above you. You didn't know if you'd make it out, or if the whole ceiling was gonna give." The fire popped. Outside, the storm howled louder. Jonas took a step back from the hearth. "Every time the wind hits," he murmured, "I hear it again. The rocks, the men yelling, the beams groaning, then the dark." Mara watched him, his face pale, his breathing unsteady, the storm playing out in his eyes more vividly than the one outside. She stood quietly. "You survived," she said. He shook his head. "Some didn't." "Surviving doesn't mean you're not allowed to be scared, Jonas." He looked at her, truly looked, his eyes dark and wet despite him trying to hold steady. "I wasn't scared then," he whispered. "Not until afterward." Mara's voice softened to almost nothing. "That's when fear shows up. When the danger is gone, but the memory stays." Jonas closed his eyes. The cabin gave a long groan as the wind slammed against the roof. Jonas tensed as if the sound were a command. Mara stepped closer, not touching him, but near enough that he felt her presence like a steadying hand. "You're not in the mine anymore," she said. "You're here, and nothing is collapsing around you." His breath steadied, slowly, unevenly, but he heard her. He opened his eyes. "You must have been scared once too," he said quietly, "living up here alone." Mara's face changed, subtle, like a shadow crossing a lantern's glow. "Fear doesn't disappear," she said softly. "You just learn to live beside it, not under it." A branch snapped outside, violent against the storm. Jonas startled again. Mara nodded toward the cot. "Get some rest." He shook his head. "You should sleep first. I can keep the fire going." "Jonas." He froze. "You're allowed to sleep," she said. He seemed almost unsure how to respond. Finally, he nodded and lowered himself onto the cot. Mara adjusted the blanket around him, not touching him directly but close enough to guide the fabric over his shoulders. Jonas stared up at the ceiling for a long moment as the wind battered the cabin. "Mara?" he whispered. "Yes. If the storm gets worse, can I stay by the fire? I don't want to wake up alone." Mara's throat tightened. She didn't show it. "You won't," she said. He closed his eyes, breath finally slowing. Mara sat in the chair by the hearth, the fire painting her face in amber light as the storm raged on. Jonas slept with his hands clenched in the blanket, as if holding on to something he didn't want the night to take from him. And outside, the mountain pushed its weight against them, testing the old cabin, testing its beams, testing everything inside it, as winter always did. By dawn, the storm had quieted, but only on the surface. The world outside was buried under a thick white hush. Snow piled against the cabin walls so high it pressed halfway up the windows. The wind had died, but the cold that followed it was sharper, deeper. A cold that didn't move, it settled. Mara opened the door carefully, pushing against the drift. A wave of frozen air spilled inside, biting at her cheeks. She stepped out, boots sinking deep. Jonas stood beside her. He had woken early, earlier than she expected, his expression steady but guarded, as if the storm had carved something new in him overnight. He held the wooden toolbox she had given him, the hat pulled low over his ears. "Roof held," he said softly, scanning the ridge line. The support beams didn't shift. "Good," Mara murmured. Jonas nodded, as if reassuring himself. The mountain was still. Too still. Mara felt it first. A tension under the snow, a subtle heaviness in the air. The trees on the slope leaned in strange angles, branches drooping under layers of ice. The hush wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Jonas set the tools down and moved toward the side of the cabin. "The woodshed collapsed," he called, voice crisp in the cold. Mara followed. The small shed had caved inward under the weight of the storm, its roof bowing, boards cracked. Firewood spilled across the snow. Jonas crouched down, brushing frost from the broken beam. "I can fix it," he said. "But the main posts split. We'll need to replace it." His voice held no fear this morning, only purpose, focus, a steadiness that came not from age, but from necessity. Mara watched him a long moment. "You're sure you're warm enough to work?" Jonas tightened the wool hat more firmly. "I'm sure." Something in his tone, quiet, confident, made her trust it. They worked together through the morning, sawing a fallen pine limb into usable lengths. Jonas handled the saw with surprising precision. His breath shook at times, his fingers still stiff from cold, but his determination didn't waver. He moved with a sense of responsibility that felt far too old for him. "You've done this before," Mara said. "A lot," he replied. "The foreman. He made us fix everything in the camp, broken carts, split rails, cracked beams. Said if we could work, we could earn our place." Mara's grip tightened on the saw. "You earn nothing from that man but scars." Jonas didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her he agreed. By midday, the shed stood again, rougher than before, but stable. Jonas hammered the last nail into the new support beam and stepped back, chest rising with slow, controlled breaths. "It's solid," he said. "It is," Mara agreed. He brushed snow from his sleeves. A faint flush warmed his cheeks, not from the cold, but from the quiet pride that settled over him. As they returned to the cabin, Jonas stopped suddenly. "Mara." She turned. His eyes were fixed on the far trail. A narrow path half swallowed by snow. Footprints. Not from him, not from her. Fresh. Mara's jaw clenched. "Go inside." "No," Jonas whispered, fear flaring. "You said I didn't have to hide from things anymore." Mara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Jonas, if someone from the camp, it's not them." She followed his gaze. The prints were uneven, dragging slightly to one side. Someone injured, someone exhausted, and heading directly toward them. Jonas swallowed. "Maybe they're like me." The cold pressed against her skin. A windless quiet settled between them. Mara made her decision. "Stay behind me," she said. They waited. Minutes passed. Then, through the white blur of trees, a figure appeared, staggering, wrapped in a torn coat, boots almost falling apart. Not a foreman, not a guard. A man older than Mara expected, maybe in his 50s, face gray with cold. He stumbled, fell to one knee. Mara reached him first. "Sir," she said, gripping his shoulders. "What happened?" The man lifted his head. His voice broke on the air. "The mine. The main tunnel. It caved in. Too many gone. The place is finished." Jonas froze. The man's eyes found him, slowly, with recognition, but no malice. "You're the boy," he breathed. "Cade. They said you ran. They said you—" Jonas stiffened, stepping back instinctively. The man raised a shaking hand. "No, no, boy. You were smart to leave. The camp, it wasn't work anymore. It was waiting for death." Snow fell between them, silent and steady. Mara exhaled slowly. "Come inside. Both of you." The man nodded weakly. Jonas hesitated. "Mara," he whispered, "I don't want him to take me back." "He won't," she said firmly. Inside, she settled the man near the fire. Jonas stood on the opposite side of the room, every muscle tight. The man's gaze softened as he looked at Jonas. "You saved yourself," he murmured. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jonas's breath hitched. He looked at Mara, eyes shining with something fragile, painful, and new. Relief. Hours passed. The man slept. The storm outside gathered again, soft but steady. Jonas sat at the table, hands clasped. "Mara," he whispered. "Yes?" He didn't look at her, stared instead at the flames flickering in the hearth. "Thank you for letting me stay, for trusting me." Mara leaned back in her chair. "You didn't need to earn your place here, Jonas. You just needed a chance to breathe." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know places like this existed." "They don't," she said. "We made this one." Jonas lifted his gaze, and something in him, something buried under frost and fear, finally thawed. A small, real smile formed. Outside, snow drifted quietly over the mountains. Inside, the fire burned steady, and the cabin, the old stubborn cabin, held firm against the winter, just as it always had. But now it held more than shelter. It held two people who had survived the cold in different ways, and were learning, slowly, to build warmth again, together.